All right, how you guys doing? BT Conf! Hey! All right, wow, thank you for having me. I am just unbelievably excited to be here. The talks have been amazing the last couple of days. I'm very happy that Shirley did some coding today because I was worried that my talk was going to be very nuts and bolts. And we've seen a lot of inspirational talks. And so I'm going to kind of maybe go in a different direction than that. So Shirley really made me feel at home with her talk. It was great. So yeah, my name is Zach Leatherman. My website's Zackley.com. I call myself a web craftsperson because I work at Filament Group. We are a 5.5, 6-person company. We're a design development consultancy. We do a lot of open source work and work with the community. So yeah, if you're interested in working with us, get in touch. But we don't really put much stock in titles, so I get to kind of pick whatever I want. And so web craftsperson kind of matches my last name. I kind of like the idea that the title that we choose sort of influences our career, I think, in some ways. So yeah, I'm a web craftsperson. And I also build in my spare time, my very limited spare time, because I have two small children. I build a static site generator called Levendy. I don't know, I guess some people, hey, nice. We have some Levendy users in the audience. I'll fix your issues later, I'm sorry. After watching the last 2 days of talks, I've just kind of been asking myself, why am I here, kind of? I'm not a super famous designer. I'm not huge on Instagram. I don't have a hugely inspirational talk, I don't think. And the only reason I could come up with is that I am very obsessed, almost unhealthily, with web fonts and type. Sort of loading web fonts in a web browser, a very esoteric, very sort of niche thing that I got obsessed with. I don't really have a good reason for it, and I just started writing blog posts about it. Stephen kind of mentioned this morning that we should sort of keep a journal and work notes, and I just kind of started doing that with web fonts. It wasn't necessarily something I was doing at work, but it was just something I was more interested in. One of my goals in life is to eventually feel comfortable to call myself a designer, and I don't think I'm quite there yet. Hopefully I will at some point. But this is kind of like my journey into that sort of space. So I'm just obsessed with type and web fonts. So I have over 50 blog posts on my website. You can go out and check that. I do actually have a hamburger menu on it. I recommend you go out and check. It's only available on desktop. So next time you're at your computer, go out and click my hamburger menu. I really recommend it. It's the best thing I have on my website. So yeah. I have been lucky enough to work with some friends on their websites, on the web font loading that they use on their websites, Smashing Magazine and CSS Tricks, with their relaunch. So I am not just doing this for myself. I have consulted with a few big-time websites to do this. But today I'm going to give you sort of a rundown of my spicy opinions that I have about web font loading. So even more esoteric, even more niche. How can I upset people that are contributing to the web font loading community, or the type on the web community? I really don't want to upset too many people. Hopefully this isn't I'm going to get hate mail for this talk. But I do love type, and I want to make type on the web better. So anyone that's contributing to type on the web, I love you. Thank you for doing what you're doing. And if I say something bad about you today, I'm very sorry. But I do want to make things better. That's my goal. So I'm going to go through a bunch of different spices and peppers here today to sort of use that to convey the opinions that I'm going to share with you all. So Wilbur Scoville, I don't know how many of you guys are Game of Thrones fans, but spoiler alert, this guy's dead. In 1912, we don't have to go into that right now, but yes, I agree with you. So in 1912, Wilbur Scoville invented the Scoville Scale, which is a scientific way to measure the spiciness of foods. And today we're going to use it to measure the spiciness of hot takes on web font and web font loading. And Wilbur Scoville is the same American pharmacist who, like Beyonce, definitely keeps a variety of hot sauces in his purse. Wilbur Scoville is the same American pharmacist who, alive today, would have been a survivalist had a bunker and it was filled to the brim with McDonald's McRib sandwiches. And this is the same American pharmacist who allegedly mathematically refuted the claim that there is, in fact, always room for Jell-O. Now, his scale was measured in Scoville heat units, which will be abbreviated in SHU, the shoes. And I went through this morning and I internationalized these units for you guys, periods instead of commas for your thousand separator. So that was a lot of work that went into that. Oh, thank you. Oh, yes. The lowest bar for applause. This conference is great. Yes, I love you guys. So it is an integer unit. It's just counting up. There isn't really an upper bound here, so we'll see how high and how spicy we're going to get today. And the first pepper we're going to go over today is the bell pepper. How many people have had a bell pepper? Quite a few. Okay. Hopefully the number of hands will be fewer and far between the farther we go on. But the bell pepper is just a very simple, mundane thing. The spelling of WEBFONT. Put a space in there. Come on. It's web space font, not WEBFONT. The little pepper. So I went out on Twitter. I asked the important questions. I always do this on Twitter. I'm a very serious, very professional person on Twitter. I'm never unprofessional. Ask the important questions. What do people use in their day-to-day discussion of web fonts? It's got over 200 votes, so it's a very important poll, as you can tell. And web space fonts won because it's the correct thing. It's in the specification. How many specification readers we got in here today? Oh, wow. I am very impressed by that. Awesome. Specifications are amazing, and that's how the best way to learn a lot of times is reading the specification, but I'm not necessarily recommending that everyone does that. So in the specification is web space fonts. Very mundane. Let's get it started. Very easy. Let's ease into it today. How many people have banana pepper? Okay, fewer. Nice, nice. Banana pepper on the Scoville scale is only 500 Scoville heat units, so very low, not very spicy at all. And basically, I want to say to you that web fonts are good. This is probably an easy crowd to convince you of that. Web fonts are good. You should use web fonts. I'm glad you guys noticed that, because I've given this talk, and it wasn't very well noticed before, and made me feel real bad. Okay, so Nieman Lab had this article, and a lot of times when I try and call people out in this talk, I will anonymize the reference, but I really think this is a good article to read, and their heart was in the right place when they wrote this article, so I don't feel bad mentioning it, even though I'm going to disagree with it. And the headline was, "Maybe to be at our best on mobile, publishers should think back to the web's early visually spare days." And this is one of the main quotes. So it was talking about a redesign that was launched, and I won't mention the name of the site that they were reviewing, but it was using system fonts. So system fonts, non-web fonts, no font loading associated with that. So the device already has the fonts installed on it. And they said that using system fonts means no added download time, no extra data used, and it's a look designed to blend in with the device that you're using. I don't necessarily think our design should blend in with the device, especially if we want branding, but we'll go into that a little bit more. My friend Jason Pimentel, he has this great quote. He says, "Type is how we hear what we read." And that has really, I don't know, that really hit me. I really love how he put that. And that's sort of an audio metaphor. I like more visual metaphors. Type is how we dress our content. So it's our first impression that we give to our users. So, yeah, so you might have a uniform that you wear every day. I have a speaker's uniform. If you go back and look at my previous talks, I'm always wearing the same shirt and tie. It just makes me feel comfortable. Steve Jobs sort of popularized this with his turtleneck and jeans combo. And then if you want to move fast and break things, I guess you wear the gray t-shirt and jeans. And then if you're a big fan of Silicon Valley, you might rock the vest. Oh, that lovely vest. I'm sorry if anyone's wearing this vest today. I really apologize to you. But the main thing I want to convince you of today, is that you should love type. Type is amazing. It's a very easy thing for me. This is probably an easy crowd for that to say that too. I'm the exact person that would say, I'm the guy that wants the logo bigger, I want the type bigger, almost too much so. But my favorite letter is the double story lowercase g. It's beautiful. I love it. Any lowercase g fans? All right, yeah. Love the double story. Amazing. That's the first character I look at when I look at a font. I will never forgive Google for their redesign. Destroyed it. Well, the thing I don't understand about double story and single story letters is that the double story minuscule or lowercase a looks like that, and the single story lowercase g looks like that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Why did they choose that name? But whatever, we don't need to talk about it too much. So when you get into websites, a lot of people are talking about performance budgets now. How many people have heard of performance budget? Okay, great. So it's basically you're setting a quota that you are allowing yourself to use, a quota of resources for a site, and you can spend up to that amount in your site's implementation. And sometimes when you sort of get into this mindset, it's very easy to convince yourself that less is more. The fewer things I put on my site, the faster it will be, the more users it will appeal to. But I don't necessarily agree with that. And I don't think that that is the spirit of the performance budget either. We're trading bytes for features. We aren't necessarily trying to build the lightest weight thing, but we want the lightest weight thing that is true to our design and still satisfies as ubiquitous of a user set as we can. So I went out to the redesign that Nieman Lab had talked about, and I wanted to see how many web fonts they were using now, because the original redesign was just using system fonts, and they got a lot of good publicity for that, for how fast it was. And so I opened up Chrome Developer Tools, and I did a web font search. I opened the console drawer, I went to the search bar, and there are actually 19 different font face files in this implementation now. And I think it's like probably like 14 months after the article was published. And so my colleague Scott Gell, he says it's easier to make make a fast website than it is to keep a website fast. And I think this is very true. All right, so you guys now are all super convinced that you're going to use web fonts on your websites now. We can move on to Tabasco sauce. 2,000 Scoville heat units, and for people that are fans of hard drive measurements, I have the 2 kiloscovilles down here. This is a unit I've just invented, and then 1.95 kibiscovilles. People that understand the difference between those two. You guys are my people. That's awesome. Okay. All right. So the thing I want to say here is that your web font fallback stack is probably too complex. There's too much going on here. And this is my ultimate pet peeve. I see this one all over the place. How many people are brave enough to admit that they've used this one, this font family stack? Oh, nice. Okay. Yes. So I love the old Apple logo, so I'm going to use that forever. So you're basically telling the browser, I want to use Helvetica. If it doesn't have Helvetica, I want to use Arial. If it doesn't have Arial, I want to use sans serif. But when it renders in these different browsers, the system defaults are Helvetica and Arial in these different browsers. So it's basically functionally equivalent to using just font family sans serif, and you don't need to do that. And then on a couple other platforms, you might see Roboto or Liberation Sans, but you would have seen those same typefaces on the other devices before. So I built this super old, super unmaintained website that doesn't have any of the newer. I think you can see like the newest one is Mavericks, which is a very, very new version of macOS. But it will you can put in your font family value there, and it will show you which, on older platforms, which typefaces are used. And a lot of times they don't change on the newer ones anyway. Well, that's not necessarily true, but yeah. It's very similar with Times and Times New Roman. On Apple, you get the Times font face. On Windows machines, you get Times New Roman. It's the same exact thing. So we can simplify those. And I wish CSS minifiers would simplify that. If I had more free time, I might implement something to share that would do this automatically for us, and I wish it did. but no minifiers that I've tested actually simplify font families for us, which would be nice. All right, let's do the jalapeno. How many people have had a jalapeno? Nice. Oh, more than even the banana pepper. Not a popular pepper. All right. Weighs in at just under 6,000 Scoville heat units, 5.61 kiloscovilles. I love that, kiloscovilles. The bulletproof font face is dead. How many people have heard of the bulletproof font face syntax? Okay, not too many. That's good. I'm hoping that fewer and fewer have heard of it as time goes on. And David Carson actually mentioned this in his talk yesterday. I don't know if you guys saw this slide. David, thank you for plugging this. Bulletproof font face. Actually, his was about furniture, but sorry to David for completely butchering your artwork on stage. So this is the bulletproof font face syntax. It's this giant monstrosity of code. It's meant to support almost every browser that supports web fonts, but really we can simplify it down to this very simple thing now. You don't need to use that giant monstrosity. And in fact, if you do use the bulletproof font face syntax, it will cause your users problems. So move to this if possible. Some sites have started to do local references in their font face stack. So you can actually reference inside of your font face block locally installed fonts, which is kind of an interesting thing that a lot of people I don't think know about. And I'm telling you about it now so that you don't use it. But if you want to understand people that do that, you can actually open up a font, and then in font book it will show you the postgrade name and the full name, and so you can put those into your font face using the local reference to try and use those if a browser has it locally installed. But my good friend Bram Stein, he's he works for Typekit. He says never mix locally installed fonts and web fonts and font face rules. Assuming that the two fonts are identical because they share a name is a recipe for disaster. And he wrote a good blog post about that, so you can check that out. And I don't want to call out a specific company that does this on their web font hosting service. So for the sake of this conversation, we'll call them Fugogants. They actually use local references in their font face stacks that they serve to users. So if you use the Fugogants web font host, you may have this problem. And any Firefox developers might know about the amazing, completely amazing fonts tab that's built in the Firefox developer tools. Super useful. I definitely recommend everyone checks this out. It works even better with variable fonts because you can do like these very cool sliders to adjust your fonts live on your page. But the great thing about it, and the thing that I use a lot, is that it will tell me if it's using a system font to render or if it's using a font face block. So a lot of times we'll have a lot of locally installed fonts on our machine, and if our web fonts aren't loading correctly, it will use the locally installed system font. And so it helps to know whether we're using our web font correctly or not. I have published a site to production that was using a locally installed font, and then the users didn't see it because they didn't have the font installed because my web font wasn't implemented correctly. So definitely check to make sure that it's working correctly. Another great thing is if you hover over, I don't know why they chose this specific thing to hover over, but it will highlight the elements on your page that are using the font as well, which is great. So when it comes to using local fonts in our font face blocks, it didn't take me long to find this example. Ken DJ New Style says, Dell, can you please stop installing your Roboto Lite font with your support assistant utility? It's making every site that he goes to that's using Fugogants look like shit. So, dude, you're getting the Dell version of Roboto. But sort of the side point that I want to make to you all is that fonts are software. They need maintenance, they need updates, they need care just like any other software package would. And sort of relying on local fonts to be installed on a web browser or on an end user's machine is problematic. All right, how many people have had a Chipotle? Not eaten at Chipotle, but had at Chipotle. Ooh, a lot of hands went down. Wow, okay. Do you guys have Chipotle restaurants here? No, okay, sorry. Super American there, okay. Yeah, so it weighs in at 6,500 Scoville heat units, 6.34 kiloscovilles. And that is just that visible text is more readable than invisible text. So by default, when you have a font face block and you put it in your code, the web browser will take up to 3 seconds to render that text. It will be invisible for up to 3 seconds. And if it loads within that 3-second window, it will render the font. If it doesn't load within that 3-second window, it will show a fallback font and then render whenever it loads successfully. So invisible text is not necessarily the most readable thing. Maybe an easy sell here. And the real story I like to tell about this is a story about Mitt Romney. So he was deciding whether or not he was going to run for president in the United States. I don't know who our current president is, but Mitt Romney was deciding whether or not he was running for president. And he had made a decision. He released it. He did a press release or whatever. And Slate published this article and said, Mitt Romney is running for president. And the article was actually using 2 different font files in the title. And one of them had successfully loaded here, and the other one hadn't, because he was not actually running for president. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the credibility of news is kind of a hot topic now. And web fonts played a role in sort of hurting the credibility of Slate's implementation, or Slate's website, because they had communicated the exact opposite thing while their web page had been loading. And I think it's really important to think about how our websites load, not just how they look when they're finished. And the easiest thing Slate could do to sort of work around this problem is to use the font display descriptor. It's a new thing, just came out in the last year or so, or it's just implemented in web browsers in the last year or so. And swap tells it to render the fallback text immediately, so you won't have any invisible text. It will render your fallback system font immediately. So if they would have used that in their web font face block, it would have solved that problem. And so you're now introducing a new problem in that your system font is rendering immediately. You have immediately visible and readable text, but usually there's a jump in between when the fallback text loads and when your web font loads. So Monica Dinculescu made this amazing service where you can actually go out and test your fallback font and your web font together, and you can adjust your line height and your letter spacing and your font size to try and make those metrics match up as much as possible. And again, I don't want to call anyone out, so this is a website from tired.com, as you can see in the logo on the top left. They have a really, really bad transition between when their system font renders and when their web font renders. And a lot of that is because there's not very many good condensed system fonts out there for use. So if you use a condensed font, web font, you're going to get this gnarly sort of jank in your text moving around. And it can be really damaging, right, when you're halfway down reading the article and the entire thing moves. It's very similar to when a site will inject ads while you're trying to read an article, and the entire thing moves and you completely lose your place. And this is what Tired used for their font family stack, tired.com. I haven't actually been to tired.com, so please don't go to that. I didn't test to make sure that that was a safe website. I should have done that, but I did not. So yes, tired.com. So yeah, they have the web font there, and then they have 4 different fallback fonts. And so when your system font fallback is very complicated like that, it's impossible to adjust your metrics to smooth that transition. So we went over Monica's tool that you can use to adjust your code to minimize the transition. But when you have 4 different fallbacks, There's no easy way for you to have 4 different adjustments served to individual users. So really try and simplify your fallbacks as much as possible. All right, cayenne peppers. Who's had a cayenne pepper here? Nice, okay. Man, you got a lot of spicy people in the audience. That's good. So again, we're zooming in on the scale. Only 40,000 Scoville heat units, 39 kiloscovils. And I want to go over the real criteria I use to evaluate a web font loading implementation. So anybody that might be familiar with my blog might suspect that it might be one of these very technical things, using preload to load our fonts faster, grouping our repaints so there's not as much jank when they load, doing incremental transfer. That's a new one that Jason just blogged about. Very cool. But none of these are really relevant to the real metric that I use, and that is real italics. How many fans we got of italics in the audience? Come on. Yeah. Italics. Get spicy. So it's very easy when you're doing web fonts to just buy one version of the font, dump it on your site, and call it a day. But I really, really love real italics. So when you spend part of your performance budget on an italic version of a font, that's just so valuable to me. It just says a lot about your placing type on a pedestal here. So this is my own website. On the left, you can kind of see the version without real italics, and on the right, you can see the version with real italics. Look at that. See, look at that. The left is so bad, right? You guys agree with me? The left is terrible, right? Yeah? You guys can see the big difference there? Huge. No, I lost you guys. This may be a better example. So this site is called Eats and Drinks. It's built with 11D. Hey, shout out. So they're using Adobe Caslon here. So this is the fake italics, and this is the real italics. And to me, this is so much more beautiful. Real italics really adds a lot to the design of the page. Fake, ugh, bad, ugly. But this uses the real one. It's great. All right, now we're getting really spicy. The habanero. How many people have eaten a habanero? Hey, all right, good. Still zooming, sorry. 225,000 Scoville heat units, 219 kiloscovils. This is a very uncomfortable, initialism. How many people know what this means? Oh, wow, only like 3. Oh, right, that's even better. So this means I am not a lawyer. And Mike actually did a little bit of foreshadowing in his talk. I really love this slide. I had to get a picture of it, because I had this slide in my talk about font licensing. It's a mess. It's pretty bad. So there are typically 2 different kinds of implementations when you try and go out and get a web font to implement on your site. There's self-hosted and cloud-hosted. Self-hosted means I put it on my own server. Cloud-hosted means I'm paying someone else to host it for me. And then even more complicated, you get into all these different pricing models, right? So you can pay subscription, perpetual license, prepaid license, or perhaps the easiest, free. So subscription models is something done by Adobe Fonts. You pay a certain amount per month. You usually get page views or unique visitors per month, a quota of those. I believe Adobe Fonts changed to allow you to do unlimited page views, so there's no quotas there. But typically when you get a subscription model, you're paying for usage. Hoefler uses perpetual licensing, or they allow you to do perpetual licensing, which means you pay one large fee up front, but you still have that quota of a certain amount of page views per month. And prepaid is a little bit different. You still are paying one fixed flat fee up front, but you're buying an exact number of page views. So it isn't necessarily you get a quota per month. You're buying for say I'll get 250,000 page views. So whenever that runs out, I'll have to re-up and pay for it again. And Monotype does this. And then free, perhaps popularized by Google Fonts. We haven't talked about them yet today. You just go out and use it, download the source code. They even allow you the option to download the fonts and host them yourselves. But yeah, so you can load from their servers for free. But a lot of times the free versions, there isn't quite as much a variety as you can get, obviously. So the thing I'd like to communicate is that licensing is very complicated. Maybe you got that from the arrows that were drawn in the previous slides. But also that licensing complicates performance. So for each of these subscription, perpetual, and prepaid, they had the notion of you're paying for a certain amount of usage. And they need to usually be able to track that usage using some sort of tracker appropriately named. So they need to be able to track your page views on your website or track your unique visitors based on how you paid for the licensing. And so there's a service called yourfonts.net. It's not, it's definitely called yourfonts.net that uses this model where they'll track your usage using an import statement at the top of their style sheet for their kit CSS that you'll download. And so that, yeah, they have an import statement, and that's how they track how many users or visitors that you have using or seeing the font that you've loaded. But when you look at the performance waterfall, there's already a ton of performance issues with web fonts in place, but that one single import statement delayed both of our web font loads down at the bottom by over half a second on 3G. Really, really terrible. So not only is the tracker doing its job of tracking the amount of usage that you're using the web font, but it's slowing the actual implementation of the web font down quite a bit. Pretty terrible. And this is another one. I don't necessarily want to name it, but it rhymes with HypeKit. They have an import statement there that it does the same thing. Very big problem. And I think we can do better. One of the easiest things that they can do is just use a background image, or there's a beacon API that they could add to their JavaScript that would sort of track usage in a better way than using this sort of import statement, the heavy import statement that really hurts performance. How many people are subscribers to Font of the Month? Oh, yes! You're awesome. Font of the Month is amazing. It's this, basically David Jonathan Ross is disrupting the game for people. He has just a subscription service you pay, and then you get all of these, you get a new font every month. It's amazing. But the really cool thing about his licensing model is that he does still charge for page views, but it's on an honor system, which I thought was really kind of cool, and really sort of more indie in that he's relying on you to measure your page views, and it doesn't hurt your page's performance to do that. And so you pay him based on how much you're using, and it's not an enforcement model. All right, now we're getting really, really super spicy now. How many people have a Trinidad Scorpion? Oh, yes, 6? Nice. Great. Not zooming anymore. Here we go. 1.4 million Scoville heat units. 1.395 megascovils. Icon fonts. Please, just please. just, oh, you guys, you're my people. You'll clap at that. That's awesome. Okay, please just stop using icon fonts. I'll leave it up there so you can get a picture. Okay. So when you load, so we've talked about sort of content fonts for most of this presentation, but when you have an icon font, it has the same problems as a content font. It has the same problems of invisibility and fallback, but a lot of times after you hit that fallback rendering point, the 3 seconds, you'll see glyphs like this appear on the page. This is the tofu on the left, and then the Firefox tofu that I had to manually draw, and it isn't really rendering great there, but so you'll see these characters when the icon font hasn't loaded yet, but it tries to show the system font fallback. Not a great user experience when the user is expecting an icon. So what a lot of people recommend is use the private use area, which is like a free-for-all Unicode range that people put basically whatever they want in there. And it's filled with stuff, right? It's filled with emoji on iOS, and so you don't necessarily want to map your icons to that if you're actually building an icon font. My favorite example of this is from 2014 when Laura Hogan worked at Etsy. She got this feedback, why is our horse emoji covering up the 5th star of my reviews? And this was actually an icon font rendering issue where the horse emoji was loading. The 4 stars were their icon font, and they immortalized this in their studio. And you can kind of see the half star had eventually loaded there. But the old Twitter, I don't know if you guys are new Twitter design, but the old Twitter design has the same problem on Firefox. This is how it looks, where it shows these fallback glyphs if you're on a slow connection. Google News has the same problem. They actually use ligatures to implement their icon fonts. But again, the fallback experience is not great. So there have been a ton of articles you can go out and read about this. GitHub has maybe the most famous one about how they switched from icon fonts to SVG. Really 4 main points they want to go through: rendering, accessibility, fallbacks, authoring. I don't really have time to go through all those today, so I would definitely recommend you read that if you're still on the icon fonts train, and migrate off of icon fonts as much as possible. Another great article by Tyler Stick, seriously don't use icon fonts. They're terrible. Death to icon fonts. I love this slide deck from Ninja Nails. Sarah Sweden made a great post about switching away from icon fonts to SVG. CSS Tricks has another good one. But really the main point that I want to convey to you today is that icon fonts are outside of the web standards mainstream. So we talked a little about font display. There is no good font display value that will work well with icon fonts. You basically, when you're using an icon font, you never want the fallback font to render, and there's no value of font display that will allow that. You certainly don't want the fallback font to render instantly. That would be terrible. This one will render on repeat views. You don't want that. It will only render your icon on repeat views. So if a user refreshes the page, that's the only time they'll see the icon font. That's terrible. You don't want fallback. That also will show you fallback fonts. So font display block is basically as if you hadn't used font display at all. It's that 3-second timeout. So you have 3 seconds to load your font icon. If it doesn't load, it shows these really gnarly bad fallback experiences. And if you want to play with font display, you can check out Monica Dinkulescu's amazing glitch page. She has some nice things you can play with around that will show you live what the different font display values mean. So if you want to learn more about that, check it out. So now we're getting towards the end here. Carolina Reaper. How many people have had a Carolina Reaper? Oh, the same people that had the previous one. What are the odds of that? All right, this one's spicy. We're getting up there. Not quite the last one, but almost. 1.569 mega Scovilles, 1.49 mega Scovilles, the best web font hosts. I'm going to pick my favorite. Just kidding. It's a question that needs more context. So when it comes to evaluating a web font host, there's a lot of things that go into it. You need to think about your users, you need to think about your content, you need to think about your hosting, how long you want the project to live. I like to build stuff that lasts, I want to think about a project living at least 10 years on the web. So I got to think about my project's longevity. Man, why am I having a hard time saying that word? Longevity. All right, here we go. My budget, my pain tolerance, because that's a lot of web font loading. It's just pain tolerance. My personal expertise. Maybe I don't want to manage my web fonts, and I'm comfortable using a third-party hosted service that does that for me. And then my performance requirements is another big one. So I will say the best web font host for me is self-hosting. I like micromanaging my web fonts. I like getting as much performance benefit as I can out of them. You may not like that. Fortunately, more and more Foundries and providers are allowing self-hosting of their fonts, so you can buy a license and still host them on your server. But I would really recommend this if you want your site to be as fast as possible. And when it comes to web fonts, they need to be fast, otherwise they're going to have very, very bad performance implications for your users. So I would recommend just find one that lets you self-host without the tracker built in. Those trackers can be really, really bad things for your users. All right, so this is the last one, the Dragon's Breath. How many people had a Dragon's Breath pepper? I am not actually sure that it's a real thing. It's unverified by the Guinness Book of World Records. So who even knows? This rando person just made a website, said, hey, I invented the most spicy pepper of all time. But that kind of fits in with the theme of what we're doing right now. So it's fine, it's okay. 2.48 million Scoville heat units, 2.365 megascovilles. How many people have heard of HTML5 tests? All right, awesome. So when this came out, there was a little bit of hot drama in that someone assigned a numeric value to the best web browser. A lot of web browser vendors didn't like it. They, in fact, hated it a lot. But I think it really gave a nice push to the web browser vendors to tell them, hey, these are the things we value. We want them to be implemented. And we want everyone to know what the best web browser is for the things that we value. So I'm going to go through and try and figure out what the best web browser for web fonts is. Sorry to web browser vendors. And we're going to do, inspired by Shirley, I'm going to make like a little bar chart thing here. We're going to race through the different web browsers and look at their support of different features that I think are very important to web font loading. So we already went through font display. We already kind of know what that is. It's very important. Implemented by 5 different browsers in our scale here. I don't know if you guys are aware of UC browser and then Samsung Internet there. Those are kind of maybe the more weird ones. But yeah, so those are the icons down there at the bottom. Preload, which is basically a way to say I want to load this font is going to load on this page, and I'm going to tell the browser to download it immediately when the website comes up. It's sort of a hint that says, hey, I'm going to use this web font. Please load it as fast as possible. It doesn't work with a lot of third-party hosts, so that can be problematic. But I think it's one of the top 2 features for implementing good web font loading implementations. WAF2 is just a format for fonts, so it allows you to make smaller files, so smaller things load quicker. Very in the same vein of visible text, is more readable than invisible text. And then Unicode range allows you to say these glyphs are in the font. These characters are in my font. If the glyphs are not in the font, don't download the font, which is kind of a nice performance thing. Variable fonts, which is like a kind of a newer thing, but the support is actually pretty great for it. A very impressive support uptake for variable fonts. Allows you to basically combine different font files into a single one. The font is usually a little bit bigger in terms of file size, but it allows you to really more granular control over your web font renders. Default visible text, I kind of added in there because I'm a big fan of IE and Edge's rendering fallback text immediately. They never did invisible text until they switched to using Chromium, so it's shot through my heart. And then color fonts is kind of a newer thing. I don't mean like single color fonts, I mean multicolor fonts. So OpenType and SVG. It's very cool. Some of you are getting very nervous that Edge is pulling ahead here. That's fine. That's fine. Get on board. If they do the best, that's great. CSS font loading API is a JavaScript API that you can use to programmatically render fonts. I use it to sort of render multiple fonts at the same time. So grouped repaints together so there's less jank, less page movement. And then just a little bonus for the Firefox developer tools. They're just beautiful. I love that fonts tab so much. And so I would say that the best web browsers for fonts, web fonts right now, are Firefox and Safari. Hey, congratulations to them. Nice job to the web browser vendors. Not done, I'm not done. So If you go out to Can I Use, you can actually do a date relative view, which is really great to see when these features were actually added. So I wanted to see who was the best web browser to deliver the features that I thought were important over the greatest amount of time. So I actually did date normalized feature support of these things, and perhaps, obviously, Chrome wins because they implement things so quick. Their release cycle is just so short. And so, really, surprisingly to me, the best web browser for web fonts over time, in terms of delivery, was Chrome. So Charlie kind of said yesterday that it was the web's constraints were really the valuable thing that made it great. And I think web fonts are really a great example of that. Web fonts are really only possible because of all these different puzzle pieces coming together to deliver type to millions of people. And we don't always necessarily recognize the typeface, but we still have some sort of emotional connection to it. So typographers, the type foundries, the license authors, the web developers, the hosting providers, the web browsers, and the web designers are really all playing an important role here to deliver type on the web. And I think type is really what can make your design unique and beautiful. And sometimes we don't agree on it, that's fine. But really the most important thing is that I want people to use type. I want people to use web fonts in their implementations. I want to see more type on the web. So anybody that's contributing to this is doing good in the world, in my opinion. And yeah, so I want the web to win. Thank you.